Welcome everyone to the sixth meeting of the 2024 Interim Joint Committee on Education. As usual, ask everyone to silence their cell phones. Once again, everyone knows there's a rule. If you want to speak in this committee, you need to sign up in the back in advance. You can do that at this time. Landon, please call the roll.
Senator Carroll. Senator Funky Frommeyer. Present. Senator Givens. Here. Senator Higdon. Here. Senator Meredith. Present. Senator Neal. Senator Stivers. Senator Thomas. Here. Senator Tishner. Here. Senator Williams. Here. Senator Wilson. Here. Senator Wise. Representative Baker. Here. Representative Bauman.
Present.
Representative Bojanowski. Here. Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Emily Callaway.
Present.
Representative Josh Callaway.
Here.
Representative Decker.
Present.
Representative Doan.
Present.
Representative Jackson.
Present.
Representative Lewis.
Here.
Representative Massaroni. Representative McCool. Representative Proctor. Representative Rayborn.
Here.
Representative Rawlings.
Present.
Representative Raymond. Representative Riley.
Here.
Representative Timoney.
Here.
Representative Truitt.
Here.
Representative Wilner.
Here.
Co-Chair West.
Here.
Co-Chair Tipton.
Here.
We have a quorum and we are duly constituted to conduct business. I will now recognize Co-Chair Tipton if he has any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looks like you have a full agenda, so let's meet.
We always do in this committee, as you know. We'll try to get us out of here on time today. Do we have any other introduction? Senator Funky Frommeyer.
Yes, we have special guests from Northern Kentucky. The Educate NKY came to visit with us today, and they've done a fantastic landscape assessment of our education. The president and CEO, Shai Calvo, and the head of our Covington School Board, Tom Haggard. Welcome.
Welcome to the committee. I would be remiss if I did not introduce our special guest and our presenter today. The superintendent of Bourbon County High School, or Bourbon County School System, does a great job. Superintendent Begley, thanks for being here today. Representative Timoney has a special introduction.
More of an announcement. Just like to bring the positive energy at the beginning of the meetings.
We need it.
As many of you probably witnessed during the World Series, Kentucky was well represented by the Los Angeles Dodgers. Will Smith was a Louisville resident and a graduate of Kentucky Country Day High School, and of course the amazing Walker Bueller from Henry Clay High School. Both did an amazing job closing out that game. I know I had quite a few constituents that were on the Lexington Catholic girls cross country team, which they repeated state champions for, I think this is the third year in a row, so that was pretty outstanding. The Lafayette boys, they won a stunning upset of the perennial powerhouse Trinity High School. That was a huge upset, so I've got quite a few cross-country constituents in the 45th that were really excited. I don't think we could go another moment without recognizing Caroline Groth, UK student, former Fayette County Public School student. She was elected to the National Executive Board for FFA. There were 6 students out of 1 million members of FFA who were involved with that, and that's a huge honor. It's the first Fayette County Public School student to be elected, not the first Kentucky student, but the first Fayette County Public School student, and she credits her love and affinity for agriculture to the time that she spent at Locust Trace Agri-Science Center, one of the many choice options that Fayette County Public Schools offers. So, Mr. Chair, a lot of positive energy behind our former students from Kentucky. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Timoney. You're exactly right. We do not focus enough on all the positives that are going on in the state. We're going to jump in and go ahead and get started. We are actually going to stay on schedule today. I apologize for the delay of the start of the meeting. We had some Zoom problems. We have a special guest on Zoom, and we got that fixed. So staying on schedule. First subject, effects of social media and cell phones on school-age individuals. If all those presenting would come to the table. Once you get to the table, as is custom here, make sure your green light's on and your microphone. pull it close to you and state your name for the record, and then we'll get started. The reason this subject matter is on our agenda today is there have been numerous bills on this subject. I believe, and we believe, there probably will be a piece of legislation move forward this session on this subject matter, and so that's why these special guests are here today. Gentlemen, if you are ready, please state your name for the record and proceed. Pull that microphone. Make sure the green light's on.
Dr. Larry
There you
Bagley, Superintendent, Bourbon County Schools.
Morgan Adkins, Principal, Bourbon County High School.
Thank you. If the gentleman on Zoom could state your name for the record.
Yes, it is Zach Rausch, Associate Research Scientist at New York University. I'm unable to see the committee. I don't know if that's intentional, so I'm just not sure when to speak. Thank you.
You're not missing very much. We have Dr. David Lawrence.
Yes, Dr. David Lawrence, Superintendent of Dayton Public Schools, for the record.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know who's up first. Hopefully you guys agree to that, but whoever's first, please proceed.
I didn't receive anything about a particular order, but you give me a microphone and an audience, and I'll take it.
Hold on a second. I believe there is an order. John is.
Zach, have at it.
I think Mr. Roush is up first. Sorry.
That's okay.
Larry.
Excellent.
Please proceed.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for inviting me here to talk. I've done a few of these testimonies, and this committee is by far the most fun. I got on and everybody's laughing, so that was very wonderful. I'm going to share some of my slides, and then I'll dive right into it. Oh, I need to request. I just requested access to present the slides.
We are working on it.
Okay, excellent. I guess in the meantime, I will just introduce myself. I'm, again, Zach Rausch. I'm the Associate Research Scientist at New York University and am the Chief Researcher for the social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. And I helped him write the book, The Anxious Generation, which came out last March. And my talk today is really to lay the foundation of kind of the big picture of what the book is illustrating about what's been happening to young people over the last decade and a half, including young Kentucky teens, and what we can do about it, and especially what schools can do. All right, so let me know when.
Zach, I was told to mention this, and hopefully you're not leaving out the fact that you were a guest on the Today Show and famous across the world for all your important work.
Thank you.
I'm delaying things while we get the technology set up for you here, as we attempt to allow you to share. We have Senator Williams involved, a information expert.
Maybe we take just a minute or two more, and if not, I can I'll just talk.
Why don't you just go ahead and start? I know you have this down.
Great.
Feel free to start however you feel is appropriate.
All right. Well, so what I wanted to do to start, and when I have my slides, may make a little more sense, is to I'd like to take a big step back, away actually from smartphones and social media, and think a little bit about the nature of childhood and just how much it's changed over the last few decades. And so when I typically give this talk, I like to ask those in the audience or those who are here to think about your own childhood and think about all the things that filled up your time. And two of the things that are very common, especially for my own childhood, was riding my bike and watching cartoons on the weekends, watching television. And so I'd like you just for a moment to think back to your childhood and all the time that you spent riding your bike. And the good times, but also the times that you hurt yourself, you fell off, you went off a ramp, maybe you broke something. And typically what I like to do in this moment is I ask, do you wish that bikes, despite all the negative consequences that may have happened, were never invented? And I typically get 0 hands put up in the air. And then the same thing for cartoons and watching television. All the time that you spent as a kid watching TV, watching cartoons by yourself with others. And if you wish that television and cartoons were never invented. And again, I typically get 0 hands in the air. So
if I could stop you right there, just to let you know, we think everything is good on our end. So if you, there you go.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So there's the bike, there's television. So we recently just did a survey of about 1,000 young people, Gen Zers, so those who are ages 18 to 27, with the Harris poll. And what we did is we looked to about what are the things that are filling up their time and how do they feel about it. And of course, the number one thing that we see is just the enormous amount of time that young people are spending on smartphones, on social media. And so what we found in the survey is just about half, more than half, spend at least 4 hours a day, every day, on using social media. And just about 1 in 4 are spending more than 7 hours a day, every day, on these platforms. And this is not including other, like television, computers, all of the other technology. So this is about a full school day, every day on these platforms. And this is not really an outlier survey at all. When we look at studies of teenagers themselves, this comes from the Pew Research Report, where they found that just about half of all teenagers say that they are online almost constantly. And so when you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed at night, when you're in the bathroom, even in the shower, kids are either thinking about what's going on their phones or they're actually on them. And here's the thing that is really quite striking is even though young people are spending so much time on these platforms, there's actually a lot of regret. There's a lot of feelings that they actually don't want to be using these platforms all that much. Now, it depends on the digital technologies we're talking about. So we asked them the exact question that I started with is, do you wish that blank had never been invented? And there was a relatively low level of regret for things like Netflix and YouTube, which is typically longer form storytelling, information gathering, the internet messaging apps to communicate with each other. And smartphones actually weren't up all that high on this list. But then the platforms that parents are most concerned about, legislators often, and ourselves, these platforms look really different. So just about 1 in 3 of our sample wished that Instagram was never invented. And then it just keeps getting higher. So Facebook a little higher, Snapchat over 40%, and then TikTok and Twitter are about 50%. So just about half of young people are saying that they wish that the platforms that they grew up with were never invented. And this includes those who are spending more than 4 hours a day on these platforms. Just about half of them say that they wish social media was never invented. And so what we're dealing with here are things that are very different from the kind of products that filled up our own childhood, whether that be bikes or radios, televisions, vinyl players, whatever. And the implications of this are really quite drastic, because what happens when you're spending 7 to 10 hours online almost all the time, or being online almost all the time? Well, it pushes out almost everything else. So we've seen large declines in time spent outdoors, physical exercise, sleeping, getting sunlight, being with friends, reading books, doing hobbies, going on dates, even having the opportunity to think deeply for an extended period of time. And for us, in the period before this rapid adoption into this technological world, we had a lot of time where we were able to fill in all of these things into childhood. But now Gen Z's childhood, because of all of this time being spent online, is being pushed into a much smaller circle. And so we really don't have time to do the things that kids need to thrive, to build skills, to kind of get from childhood and into adulthood. And this is what we call the phone-based childhood. This is the kind of world that kids are growing up with today. Spending 7 to 10 hours on platforms designed to hook you, and often using platforms that you wish didn't even exist in the first place. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. I'm going to just give a little bit of a sense of the mental health crisis of what's happening to young people, the cost of this new phone-based childhood, and what we can do about it, especially schools and legislators in particular. So when Jonathan Haidt and myself were trying to understand what was happening to the mental health of young people, we noticed that there was kind of a pattern in the data sets that showed up in kind of all over. And that was that things really started to change in the early 2010s. Before, things were relatively stable. And it hit girls particularly hard, more than boys. And it was specifically things that we call internalizing disorders. So issues of anxiety and depression, loneliness, self-harm. And it hits young people much more than adults, and especially Generation Z, those who are born after 1995. And it's happening in many countries all around the world. And it's not just mental health. We're seeing changes across a variety of measures, from attention to learning performance and social relationships. Gen Z is very different than the generations that came before. So just to give a sense of what I'm talking about, this is a graph that shows the percent of anxiety prevalence among Americans. This comes from the National Survey of Drug Use and Health, and they do this survey every year. And we can see that there has been more than a 160% increase in those in young Americans ages 18 to 25 who feel nervous almost all of the time or most of the time in the past month. And so it's particularly this young generation who is feeling so much more anxiety and reporting it much more, while those who are older don't see much change at all. Now, to look at now depression trends, this shows trends, the percentage of American teenagers who had a major depressive episode in the last year. So that's having at least 2 weeks in the year where you're feeling a perpetual state of sadness or emptiness and a variety of other symptoms. And before 2010, the rates, as you can see, are relatively stable, girls a little higher than boys. But then after 2010, things really change. So by 2021, just about 1 in 3 teen girls are now reporting a major depressive episode in the last year alone. It's become a normal part of American adolescence to experience this kind of depression and anxiety. And it's not just these self-reported studies, which are very valuable, but we also have changes in behavioral data. So this is looking at young 10 to 14-year-olds and going to the emergency department for non-fatal self-harm injuries, which is typically around cutting or self-poisoning. This has more than tripled for 10 to 14-year-old girls since 2010. And we can see this, there's a lot of figures here, but the key point to look at is each graph is looking at different age groups of women over time going to the ER. And the key thing to see is just that the lines, as you get from younger to older, start to become more horizontal. So the impact in particular is among young teenage girls. This is where the changes are really happening. And we find the same kinds of trends in other countries around the world. So here is in the UK. This is in Ontario, Canada. I have graphs also in New Zealand and Australia that look very similar. And we also see that it's happening among in not just self-harm, but also in suicide. And this is often where we start to see what's going on with boys a little bit more clearly. But there have been more than a doubling of rates of suicide since the early 2010s. Now, of course, suicide fortunately is very rare for young adolescents, but the change is really quite shocking and striking. Now, I am not able to get the same kind of fine-grained data in Kentucky just because the samples or the number of people is much smaller, but you can still get a sense of what's happening in your state. So this looks at, this is CDC data of young people ages 10 to 24. And we can see that there has been also a substantial increase, almost a doubling, 78% increase since 2010 in suicide rates among young 10 to 24-year-olds. And going from the local to the global, we see that actually in countries all over the world, this is using the Program for International Student Assessment, which looks at measures of school loneliness. Like, I feel like an outsider at school. I feel like I belong at school. I feel lonely at school. And what we can see in this graph is on the x-axis is years, the y-axis is the average agreement with these items. And the higher the score, the more that you feel lonely, alienated at school. And right around 2012, all of these measures start to increase, especially in the English-speaking world, but also in many other areas. And here we can see that it's not just mental health. This is the nation's report card here in the US, looking at changes in reading and math among 13-year-olds. And in both, there was a relatively steady but slow increase over time since the 1970s. And now we all know that during COVID, scores really plummeted, and COVID really did matter, but these trends actually started beforehand. They started again in right around 2012. We can see this here with math scores starting to decline, reading as well, and then even further declines. So now we are mostly back to where we were in 1971. And like the mental health trends, it's not just here in the US. This is that PISA survey, again, looking at average scores in math, reading, and science in 36 countries. And up through 2010, relatively stable. And then those scores start to fall. So what's going on here? What's happening? There are many explanations that are put out by different people. We've addressed a lot of that in a lot of our research and work. But what I'm going to focus on is our explanation, which is that childhood, as I said, kind of illustrated in the beginning, went through a rapid transformation between 2010 and 2015, where kids moved from having what we call a play-based childhood, embodied physical in the real world, into a phone-based childhood where we are on screens 10 hours a day, being online almost all of the time. And so if you were born before the 1980s or so, this looks more like what childhood was like. Lots of play, independence, unsupervised play, maybe hanging on a clothesline like the kid at the bottom. But if you were born after 1995, childhood starts to look really different. It's much more isolating, much more, you are often alone, you're often using screens, but those screens, even when you're with other people, it's often mediated through those devices. And so our story in the book is about the way that the play-based childhood, that physical, embodied, out in the real world, taking risks, challenges, engaging with other kids to build those skills, started to fade out over time. It didn't just start in 2010. But then the phone-based childhood stormed in with the iPhone, social media, front-facing camera, high-speed internet. And this really changed the way that kids were growing up. So that's the big picture story that we tell. And now I just want to illustrate some of the costs of what this new phone-based childhood really looks like. So to be clear, what we can see in this graph is the share of American households with different technologies over time. We got radio, color television, computers, the internet. And what I want to be clear about is that we're not saying that all of these technologies in the past are problematic. What we're talking about is the combination of smartphones and social media, which you could see at the end of this, where that comes together in the rapid migration of teenage social life in particular onto these platforms, which is the problem. And we can see this in this graph, which comes from Monitoring the Future, which shows what's happening to American high schoolers. And this shows the percent of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders who use social media sites almost every day. The key thing is that in 2009, just about 50% were using social media every day, especially, and then by 2012, especially for the older teens, that gets up to 75%. And why this matters is that social media became something that you could choose to use, and became very quickly something that you had to use in order to stay connected with your friends, with your relationships. It became almost a requirement to use these platforms. And so what we're saying is that when the millennials, if you were born before 1995, you went through puberty, you went through early childhood and adolescence with a flip phone. And this was a phone that you could use to connect with friends and family. It didn't have a front-facing camera, no access to the internet, no Instagram. You had to pay for text. It was pretty slow, and nobody wanted to spend their days on their flip phone. That really changes for what Gen Z is going through puberty. So now you have a portal by which companies and strangers competing for each other for your attention is trying to hook you using, and it has the front-facing camera, high-speed internet, Instagram, unlimited data and text, unlimited ways to interrupt you throughout the day. And it's this change that we think is particularly problematic. And there is evidence of harm really everywhere. So we know that there is enormous evidence just from the companies themselves, from what we have learned from their own internal reports that get released. We have correlational evidence, experimental evidence, what young people themselves say, what parents say, what educators say, and it fits the pattern that I talked about at the beginning around the timing, the international scope, the age group, genders, and disorders. And I'll just go through a couple of these to get a feel for this. So what we're discovering is that there is an industrial level scale kind of harm that these platforms are having on young people. In 2020, the Facebook whistleblower report came out from Frances Haugen showing that Instagram knows that just about 1 in 3 teen girls say that Instagram is making their body image worse, with a variety of other statistics just like this. Just more recently, we saw revelations from both Snapchat and TikTok. And some examples of really just shocking numbers is that they found on Snapchat that there are about 10,000 reports of sextortion every single month. And in the report, they said that this likely represents a small fraction of the abuse. And they also said that almost none of them, very few of them, ever get addressed. On TikTok, they also revealed the very high leakage rates of violating content that's not removed. So just about 1/3 of content related to the normalization of pedophilia, 33% of minor sexual solicitation, 39% of minor physical abuse. I mean, we could just go on. 100% of content related to fetishizing minors. This is from their own internal reports. And on Meta, a whistleblower, Arturo Bejar, came out and found that just about 1 in 8, 13% of 13 to 15-year-olds reported experiencing an unwanted sexual advance on Instagram in the last 7 days, in the last week. And he describes this in this way. That Instagram hosts the largest scale sexual harassment of teens to have ever happened. So there is a huge level of harm going on, and we're just scratching the surface here because there's so much we don't know from the companies. This is just what has been forced to be released or unintentionally released. We also have correlational evidence showing that this looks at hours per day on social media and the percent depressed on the y-axis. And what we see is that those who spend at least more than 5 hours a day on social media are 3 times more likely to be depressed than those who don't use it at all. And remember, just the average teen is using social media 5 hours a day. And a meta-analysis of a number of studies just like this find that for every 1 hour increase of use, there's a 13% increase in depression. We also know from a variety of studies that there's a unique window where social media seems to be particularly problematic, and that is during early puberty, when kids are particularly sensitive to social belonging, social cues. Kids' brains are not fully developed yet, especially your frontal cortex, which helps you manage, it's kind of the brake of a car. It helps us regulate our emotions, stop using something to set boundaries. And so what we find is that girls 11 to 13, boys 14 to 15 seem to be most negatively impacted by the platforms. And there's also a lot of experimental evidence. This is still an area that's actively being debated. But what we've seen in our own research is that when we look at social media reduction, when people are asked to reduce their use either by half or fully for at least 2 weeks to get over potential withdrawal effects of 1 day, 2 day, 3 day at the beginning, we see consistent improvements in anxiety and depression in particular. And then youth also blame these platforms. So this is in Australia, where we see 12 to 25-year-olds, the number one reason that they blame, that they think there's been declining youth mental health in their country is social media. We're also working with a bunch of youth-led organizations who are trying to make changes here in the United States because of the harm that impacted all of them. Teachers themselves also blame social media. So this is looking at asking teachers, this is 3,000 teachers from the National Education Association, asking them to rate how much each of the following factors contribute to the mental health among their students. About 84 and 81% say that social media is contributing to the mental health issues among their students. And there are just so many stories of parents who have lost their kids who are struggling, and we work with all of them, and it is there are just very few guardrails, very few supports for kids who where things go wrong on these platforms. And the key kind of theme of our work is that we have been made two big mistakes, well-meaning mistakes, in that we've been overprotecting kids in the real world, but underprotecting them online, and we need to do a lot more to fix that. So what we can do, the key idea I want to bring today is of a really important study that came out last year out of the University of Chicago. What the researchers did is that they asked about 1,000 college students how much money it would take for them to deactivate their Instagram or TikTok accounts for a month. And the answer to that question surprised me. They said $50 on average, meaning that, like, yeah, they didn't want to get off. You'd have to pay me to do it. But then they asked, this is the key thing, they did another condition where they just changed the wording just a little bit, where they asked how much money it would take for them to deactivate their accounts for a month if they got the rest of their campus to do so as well. And the answer to this question was very different. And in fact, it went down below zero on average. So in other words, what they're saying is that the participants would pay the researchers to do this, to get everybody else off their accounts. And the way that the authors describe this is that the students prefer the product not to exist, but can't coordinate to stop using it. In other words, parents and teens are trapped. Teens continue to use social media because everybody else is on it. And if they don't use it, they feel left out, disconnected. No parent wants to be the only one to say, well, no, you can have a phone until you're 16, but then everybody else has it. And so we continue to give kids smartphones, social media at younger and younger ages. In the UK, now about 25% of 5 to 7-year-olds have a smartphone. This is the trajectory that we are going on too. So parents and teens need help. And we need to do this not at an individual level, but at a collective level. Because so all of the solutions that we present is about how do we do this to solve this kind of collective action problem. So what we suggest is that we create a norm that no smartphones until high school, no social media until 16, phone-free schools, and more independence, free play, responsibility in the real world. Now, for the talk today, I'm just going to focus on number 3, which is the phone-free schools, and what we mean by that and why this is so important. So just to give you a sense of what's going on in schools today, this is an image of a middle school class where the teacher asked the students to come up during one period and mark every time that they got a vibration from their phone in their pocket and where that was coming from. And it is just shocking. And I don't know how kids are able to learn in an environment when they're constantly being pulled away by their devices. And this is part of the reason why we believe that scores suddenly started to drop as teens started bringing these devices, these platforms into the classroom. Teachers are quitting in droves. There are a variety of studies and a variety of surveys and stories like this one from the Wall Street Journal. And here are just a couple quotes to get a feel for this. Where he says in the article, dozens of teachers have told me they spend more time policing kids' phone use than they do teaching. For Rutherford, who is the center of this article, a 35-year-old teacher who once embraced technology, seeing kids checked out and in his view addicted robbed him of the joy of teaching. He decided to do a detox project with his students that for a month before he quit. Before he quit his position, he tried to see what would happen if he got his students to stop using for a month. And here is the experience of one of them, one of the students. So before the detox, a senior in his AP bio class was spending 6 hours a day on her phone, most of it watching TikTok. I would go on my phone at the beginning of every class and never get off, she said. She's now down to about an hour a day and has read 9 novels since starting the detox. She's also been doing homework in long chunks without breaking to watch TikTok every 10 minutes. She says she's in a better mood and feels less stressed. These are the kinds of stories that we hear all the time. And the key thing that I want to bring to you today is that what we are calling for from our view is that we need to go beyond just instructional time bans, in part because just getting phones out of the classroom still the devices saturate all of the time in between, in the hallways, in the lunchroom, during recess. And what we see is that actually teachers really support this. So this looks at, it is the same survey of teachers that I showed before. This shows the total support of those who would like that the school prohibit student use during instructional time. What we find is 90% of teachers support this. What's quite amazing is 83% support a cell phone ban during the entire school day, with school-approved exceptions for things like medical or assistive technology needs. And what's most fascinating is there is 62% actually oppose a cell phone policy where the school leaves it up to the teacher to determine their cell phone policy. Because teachers also feel trapped, because if they're the only teacher doing this, it's just constant conflict with their students. And so what we really recommend is pushing for phone pouches or phone lockers, where students come in at the beginning of the day, put the phone in the locker, they get it back at the end of the day. This alleviates a lot of the conflict that happens during the school day and allows kids to have 7 hours of their childhood back. Now, we don't have much research yet about what the effects of this are, but we have a lot of anecdotes. And what we hear from teachers, especially, is that they're starting to hear laughter again in the hallways. Things like, we hadn't heard that in 10 years. Teachers having to actually tell students to quiet down in class at the beginning of class because it's been so quiet. There's less distraction. Teachers love it. And although students have a hard time often at first because they haven't experienced anything else, they've been spending every day on these platforms for 5-10 hours. But over time, especially after a couple of weeks, they really start to see the value of it. And so at a state level, we really encourage that legislators and help schools push in this direction to go phone free with different kinds of incentives, helping to fund the phone lockers and pouches. At a school by school basis, it really can help. And funding research to see the effects of doing these different kinds of policies and seeing what works and what doesn't. And so just to wrap things up, I started this talk by showing that nearly half of young people wish that the major social media platforms that many kids are using every day were never invented. This is nothing like the kinds of products that we often think about when we grew up, like bikes or television, radio. And it actually looks a lot more, in my opinion, like cigarettes, and how cigarette smokers deeply regret the amount that they smoke and regret starting in the first place. And so this is the call that I have for all of you, is that we believe that this has really been a catastrophic failure. And we need to bring an end to this phone-based childhood and try to restore a play-based childhood. And one of the best ways to do this is at an institutional level, especially in schools. And we need to do better for the next generation. So thank you so much for giving me the time to give this presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roush, on your excellent presentation. I think definitely I can say that was pretty eye-opening for everyone here today. I'd like to thank John Ballard for connecting you with the committee and getting you on the agenda for today. We're going to keep things moving along. I'm going to jump next to Dr. David Lawrence, Superintendent of Dayton Public Schools. Superintendent Lawrence, if you can hear me, as usual in this committee, we start out slow and then we're immediately behind. And so if you could keep your comments to about 5 minutes, and then we'll kick it over to our guys from Bourbon County.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for having me. I was excited to be here. I was excited when you reached out. We've had other entities reach out as a result of some of the news media around our cell phone procedures and collection process, and it's been really fun to talk about it. And so I'm just going to walk through, and I want to thank Zach Roush. What a great introduction or segue into this work. He's dealing with empirical research, and now we can talk about how qualitatively it affects students and what the results are out here in the field. So I did not know this was going to be the case, but a great lead in. Let's just talk briefly about the context in which we're collecting those phones. There's about 10 secondary schools, as you can see there. So when you see me refer to these schools, I'm referring to our 10 secondary schools. We do not have this practice at the elementary school because we typically are not having a lot of phones until around the 6th grade, and we have probably less than a dozen per school at the other 17 elementaries. And so we do not mass collect them at those schools. The history of how we got here. Thurgood Marshall STEM High School, which is where I used to be the principal about 15 years ago, they began collecting cell phones mid-year in 2021 because there was a new principal and there were a massive number of fights that were breaking out. And that principal saw that they were being videotaped. There was also a parent liaison volunteer who worked in the building. So that principal and that parent kind of went public and said, hey, listen, we're going to, with the support of the then superintendent, go and we're going to implement something called yonder pouches, which is when you place your device in a interlocking pouch that has a circular space on the top of it, and it's kind of rectangular on the bottom. And when it closes, it clips with a metal pin that's about 2 inches long, and then it's in theory closed, and there's a magnet on the other side, and you're not supposed to be able to get your phone out. I'll speak to that later. During the next school year, high schools were given the choice. The next school year was my first year as the superintendent. This is my second year. So all the high schools then were given a choice, and they kind of did 2 different methods or models. One kept the yonder pouches, and the others started to just collect the phones and put them in simple envelopes that they would put them in. And in some schools, they have them labeled with your name. In some schools, they're in folders and bags that they take to the kids' 7th period room. So it was just different spaces, but they were all given the choice. And then this year, all schools have implemented a cell phone collection system that's very similar. We don't have the yonder pouches anymore. We all have some form or some version of envelopes that are either sometimes color-coded like by the school, or sometimes just the different sizes of the envelopes and different ways in which they're distributed. We went to those pouches because they're ineffective. I saw my first year in the superintendency how much the first school, Thurgood Marshall, spent out of their school funds for yonder pouches. And I noticed that they were expensive to go it's not nationwide, to go district-wide. And also there were some other districts like Akron City Schools that took our lead the year before. And when I was a business manager, I went to visit, and they took our lead, and they had the same problems I'm going to talk about right now, or the same issues. The yonder pouches are accessible, meaning the kids are amazingly creative and super innovative, and they were able to open these yonder pouches and get their phones out. And so then you have that situation that Zach talked about earlier around most teachers were excited about the fact that the phones weren't there. Once you can get inside your yonder pouch, bend that 2-inch pin, and get your phone out. Now we're back to this conflict between, hey, I need your phone, or I'm not going to give you my phone, because kids, as you can see, can be very addictive as it relates to the phones. And no worries.
Sorry about the tech issues.
No worries.
Let me just download this and open it. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank goodness for my super public information officer.
We're just happy the problem's not on our end.
Thank you, Alex. So as I mentioned before, they're expensive, easy to get into, and we began to have the same issue we had before in terms of students having cell phones. How the collection system works, I mentioned it to you. I just won't read this to you, but I'm in buildings every day, and essentially students come in, and in one particular building, they already know where they're alphabetically where they're going. They take their phone, and there's somewhat of a trust factor, and they go and they actually place their phone in the envelope, and they walk into breakfast and keep moving. We've not had a single cell phone misplaced or taken at Wright Brothers Middle School, which is where I'm talking about. Ponet's Technical High School, CTC, our Career Technical Center, is our largest self-sustaining high school. It's about 900 kids, and they come in 3 different doors, and they do something very similar, but they go to their 7th period class, place their phone in that 7th period class, and then at the end of the day, the principals and counselors and other support personnel in the building, they roll around on carts and take those phones to the 7th period. And so there's just different versions of that, but the end result is the same. The benefits, Mr. Roush talked about that earlier. Some of the benefits, he talked about kids being engaged. We see that. We see kids talking more in the hallways. We see kids talking a lot more at lunch to each other face to face. Kind of harkens back to the pictures he showed about pre-1995 and what childhood life used to be. We hear more talking in the hallways, and we have fewer fights. And we also, I don't know if this is a function of it, but at high schoolers and middle schoolers, one of their first forays into adulthood in their minds is to use profanity. So when you go in these high schools and middle schools across the nation, you'll hear kids using profanity they shouldn't. But I qualitatively rather, because I walk the buildings, I hear a lot less profanity. I don't know what that's related to, but it's an association with us taking all the cell phones. So that's kind of our story. It's been a success story for us, and we continue to tell it, and we would do it again in the same ways that we just did it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lawrence. We really appreciate the presentation and your input, and I think it clearly goes in line with testimony of Mr. Roush. Up next, we have Larry Joe Begley and Morgan Atkins representing Bourbon County. Mr. Atkins, I apologize that I did not introduce you to begin with. You're the guy that makes Mr. Begley look good. Honestly, I did not recognize you in your Frankfurt clothing attire.
No issues, no problem.
I remember you in your day-to-day attire. So, welcome to Frankfurt, and whoever wants to take off, proceed.
I'll take a few minutes and take a different direction maybe. I don't want to reiterate what you've already heard Zach and Dr. Lawrence say. I appreciate everything that they say. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to say some things, and I'll really try to respect the time, but I've been uniquely gifted, I think, with the ability to take a short story and make it very long, so I'll try not to do that. But some of the things that I would like to talk about is after you watch in Senator West's words an eye-opening presentation like Zach, and then the systems and the funding issues that Dr. Lawrence spoke to, and see the importance and the critical need for such a policy or even a law for something like this, the question after a presentation like that should certainly be, why not? Why haven't we already address this. In my opinion, that should be the question. What would be the holdback? What would be the reservations after hearing what we've already heard? And I hearken back, I wrote some notes down here from Zach that, 2010, somewhere around that area is when we became a phone play society and not a play society. But I hearken back to John Akers, who most of you are probably familiar with, the Kentucky Center for School Safety. I remember that he wrote a letter in 2000, going as far back as 2007, advocating for policies and phone limits from legislators to give administrators, because I was a much darker-headed high school administrator myself in 2007. So I remember back those days that we saw this coming, and Zach used stats like 50% use social media in 2010. That's still half of your student body, and that's an alarming number. So why not? What would hold us back? And I think the crux of it and the elephant in the room would be the pushback from parents and students that want to communicate throughout the day. Eliminating the opportunity to parents to have 100% access to their student 100% of the day. That is why it has not moved farther, in my not so humble opinion. That is what has held us back. And I would say that and no one in this room is stranger to opposition, right? That would surprise me if people in this room, were strangers to opposition. But I would encourage you to understand that the opposition is not as many as you think it is. It just turns out to be that the people that oppose this are just a little louder than the people that support it. When we moved to this in Bourbon County, and we did a detox method, I know that Zach's talking about a phone-free school. We did a detox method where we removed it from classrooms. We put the phone pouches in the classrooms. They check it in and check it out during the class, because we wanted a rule to address engagement in the classrooms to increase student performance, and we wanted to reduce at the classroom level disruptions, but still give parents an opportunity to be able to communicate throughout transitions and maybe even lunch. And if somebody forgot their soccer socks, they could still tell their mom to get them down there and for practice. I forgot my socks for practice, and still be able to communicate. So that was part of the alleviation. But I would say that communication, education is the secret to that. We communicated the policy as a group. But the individual oppositions, I took the time, and Mr. Atkins took the time to speak to those that opposed it individually and not as a group. And that has made the difference in Bourbon County. Because, like I said, the people that supported it, the people that catch me in Walmart in behind the bread aisle and say thank you for that, is different than the people that's on social media opposing me publicly. And so it's not as we don't have an opposing number like we think we do. It just turns out that those that are against us are the loudest. And I'll let Morgan share about some things.
Thank you all for your time. I also enjoyed the presentations from both Zach and Dr. Lawrence, and kind of to speak to some of that. Prior to this school year, we had a cell phone policy that predicated on teachers to have individualization in their classrooms. And what we found were the teachers that were able to educate, engage students, and had cell phone policies that kept that were being labeled as the bad teachers. They were getting the stigma. Why are you forcing me to do something that my other staff members are not doing? And so when we went to this policy through our PBS committee, who is the group of teachers that actually said, we've got to do something. We can't leave it up to the individual teachers to make classroom decisions, because then it's affecting those of us that are actually trying to do our job and trying to benefit students. And so when we surveyed our staff members, we had an overwhelming majority that said, yes, let's do this. But something else that was kind of noticeable that we found is in May of last school year, we sent out a social media communication to our families, to our community, to our stakeholders. Hey, next year we're going to some type of cell phone policy that's going to limit them in the classrooms. And what we found in the comments of that were, we had teachers from other school districts wishing that, hey, I wish my school district went to something like this. I wish that our leadership or our district supported something like this that would ultimately help us in the classroom. Because one of the things that we noticed academically, the student apathy, our performance wasn't where it needed to be. Our student writing skills, our student social skills, communication skills, all those things that we're trying to build into our portrait of a learner those lifelong skills, those citizen skills. They just weren't there because all of our students' time was on that cell phone. And what we also noticed is kids in the classroom aren't just disrupting kids in their classroom. They're able to disrupt and to get off-task kids that are in other rooms, because social media isn't bound to the space that you're in. Social media is everywhere. We've also had one of my assistant principals pull up our discipline data comparing August, September, and October of last year to the same time this year, and we're down in every single month in the number of discipline referrals. One thing that we also notice is our hallways are much clearer during class time. I think one of the big issues that you found is, hey, I'm going to text my girlfriend or my friend, hey, ask your teacher to go to the bathroom. And so those kids could be in different rooms, send messages and say, hey, let's go to the bathroom. And so then there's more and more class time. It's harder to monitor and police those areas. So you're having more behavioral incidences occur because you don't have the staffing to police that. During transition time, we have those supervision plans in place to where we can be present and vigilant and all those things, but that doesn't happen during the class time. And so kind of to speak to what Dr. Begley said, I can count maybe on my hands how many parents I've actually spoken to who have had real grave opposition to this policy. We kind of thought as administrators, oh man, the start of this school year is going to be difficult. All we're going to focus on every single day is going to classrooms and forcing kids to put up their cell phones, but we really haven't been charged with that. We were able to start our school year like any normal school year. We didn't have the student opposition that we felt like we would have. We're part of the UK Next Gen, and one of the things that we were asked to do was survey 100 kids kind of around the portrait of a learner. But in those conversations, I was able to ask students, what's your thoughts on the cell phones? And yeah, they were annoyed that they had to put them up, but they all admitted to being more engaged in the classroom, being able to have a greater attention spans, and ultimately more successful. And that was the singular focus of this plan primarily, was how do we increase engagement? How do we increase rigor in the classrooms to where our kids can be productive citizens when they leave us? Now, like Zach said, it had some side effect benefits as well. We don't see as much of the cyberbullying. We don't see as much of the social media influence in the day-to-day. We've essentially taken 6 hours of our day to where kids can't access those platforms to where cyberbullying and fights are set up. Because another thing that we notice is the two individuals that may be having issues with each other, in most cases, we've discussed it, hashed it out, and moved on. It's the individuals around them that want to continue to push the drama, and cell phones and technology and social media allow those things to continue to stir and percolate, and you lead it, and you have more discipline issues because of those. But since we've removed those from the classroom, we are now able to focus on the academic side, what we're actually tasked with doing. Now, with that, it's our job to now figure out, let's make sure that we're doing our part in actually increasing the rigor and providing the academic education that we've promised parents and kids. But now we can actually focus on that without having to worry about what I think and what most educators would say is the number one barrier to the academic scores in the state of Kentucky. One thing that I think is prevalent, just looking at our KSA data at the school level, but also at the state level, we have 0%. We don't have enough kids to register proficient distinguished in science. Not even a single percentage. We had 2% in our entire building, so 98% of our science was novice and apprentice. Now, I don't think that's solely on staff, but I think it speaks to the apathy and the engagement level of our students, which is directly a reflect of cell phones. It's similar across the board in other content areas as well. I'm excited to see what our data looks like next year because we've removed that barrier. How much did it actually benefit our academic success? We've already seen it help our discipline. We've already seen it help our social and emotional well-being in our school. Now, the other triad of that triangle is our academic success, and I can't wait to get the data on that.
Thank you so much for finishing us up. Boots on the ground experience and excellent presentations by all four gentlemen. We really appreciate it. I'll remind members, I'm going to count. As usual, we're behind on time. We have 9 questions, and so please limit your questions to 1 question. We're going to allow about 5 to 10 minutes in this segment, and we have to move on. So if you're at the end of the list, I'm sorry, we may have to leave you off. But first up, we have Representative Josh Callaway.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. A lot of good information. It's really heart-wrenching when you look at where we are as a society. My question is, there was a bill that was filed last session to address some of this, and I'm sure that something will be looked at for legislation. I had superintendents, some that reached out to me and said this is a lost battle, that this battle has already been fought and lost. What would your words be to those superintendents that feel like that? And primarily it was just what you said, because of parents and kids push back that they were making those statements.
I'll answer that if nobody else wants to. I would encourage my colleagues, because I am a superintendent, to have more conversation and not just assume that we're going to have pushback, because there's always pushback. I mean, in everything that we do, and I would just encourage them to be courageous and at least take a try, before you say no. And I can speak to myself on that. I can certainly come to you and self-profess that until other people get behind you and give you a little nudge, it does seem scary. It was scary for me to take that leap until I had people like Morgan Adkins and board members and community members to nudge me. So if I could help nudge somebody to step forward, because I have been in those shoes and I have been apprehensive myself, and it's just encouragement. And encouragement from legislators to sometimes say, I've got you on this, that helps.
Representative Bowman. Dr. Lawrence, want to comment?
Yeah, we have 7 board members, and I would encourage other superintendents, because this is a really ugly reality. Superintendency is dangerous. It doesn't, especially in the urban centers, it's an 18-month job on the average in the 100 largest urban centers. And so, superintendents worry about their job, and they worry about the constituency of parents who may be board members one day or can influence board members. So I sat down with the 7 board members that I have, and they were all thumbs up, and they held firm to any complaints that came from parents and said, hey, listen, this is district policy. We support the superintendent. And so for me, it was an easy decision.
Thank you. Representative Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. I don't know if you know this or not, but we have a high school in Louisville, Kentucky called Fern Creek High School. And it is, I believe, the first cell phone free school in the state. And as we've seen in the presentation here, the results from Fern Creek are pretty clear in the early returns here, that performance is up, behavior is better. The kids and teachers appreciate it. They like it. As far as I'm aware, there is absolutely nothing in KRS today that is preventing school systems across our state from implementing the policy necessary to help our children. So I challenge all of you to do so. And why do we worry about whether or not Johnny left his socks at home and mom needs to get him to him, as opposed to what clearly represented in the data and the studies here is best for our children? Why hasn't every school gone to this model as Fern Creek has in Louisville?
We're going to, if you don't mind, we're going to leave that as a comment rather than a question. And I think it's pretty apparent. Thank you. It's a great comment. Appreciate it. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I've got some comments to make. I actually attended the Excel and Ed conference last November. I heard Jonathan Haight's presentation on that last year. John Ballard was at that conference as well. And since that time, I've been doing a lot of reading on this issue, and all the anecdotal evidence that I have seen is that students are actually talking to each other. There are less discipline problems. There are less issues with these mental health problems, less fights, and students are more academically engaged. Representative Callaway mentioned we did have House Bill 383 in the House. It passed out of the House Education Committee last year. There is a bill being drafted at this time to present in the 2025 session. 2 points to make. Number one, if we direct every school board to set a policy like this, it's going to take the heat off those superintendents if we direct it at the General Assembly level.
Thank you. Amen.
And two other points. There's a distinction we're going to have to decide, and we saw this difference in both presentation. You have the concept of a bell-to-bell ban, and then you have the concept of a ban during classroom time. So I think that's one of the discussion points we're going to have to discuss when we get in session. But I am wholeheartedly behind this effort. Thank you.
Representative Emily Callaway.
Thank you. Thank you for the thorough presentation. It was very eye-opening and disturbing, especially how disproportionately it was affecting the females. I was disheartened to see that. So thank you for those details. I have been in discussion with one of my principals within my district, right outside my district, and they implemented the bags for a period of time. High school. It is a high school, I don't know if I said that. And there were some definite benefits, but she ended up pulling them out. And her approach was, we want to teach our high schoolers to be able to regulate this themselves. They're about to go out into the real world, and it's not going away. We need to be able to equip them to regulate it appropriately. So there's no use in the hallway, obviously, and teachers are still able to restrict it in the classroom as necessary. But what they've spent that money on, because those bags are so expensive, is more interactive, physically challenging activities. A VR, they've got a VR room now. Anything they can do to get the students up and moving, that's what they're investing in, because they have seen that getting them up and moving and distracting them from their phone or whatever is dinging in their pocket, whichever social media is dinging in their pocket, that they will keep them engaged. So while I applaud Fern Creek, I do see it has been very beneficial there. I don't think, again, it's cookie cutter, and I think we need to be very careful about how far down we regulate. I think we do need to listen to the administrators and see what's working for their students. And like I said, this in my district, they saw that preparedness. They want their students to be better equipped to handle this that will be a eternal distraction, how to handle it appropriately and handle their responsibilities. So I'm going to give you that input. I guess that is more of a comment too, except maybe how would you recommend high schoolers learn to regulate their time if it's just being stripped from them in the classroom?
You were looking at me. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in and answer that. I have always found it difficult to not be consistent. Pick one or the other. I have always had me personally, when I was a classroom teacher, when I was a high school principal, and even a superintendent, when you have some hybrid models that some have leeway and some don't, I've always seen them just kind of fade away and lose interest, and that would be my caution on, not having consistency across the board. That would be my concern.
I think Mr. Roush wants to chime in here on this question. Please proceed.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is an important question and an important part of the debate. And I guess from my end, what I would want to bring into that part of the discussion is, I think that sometimes it seems like there are only two options of either you teach kids how to use something, or either you have the phones in school and therefore you're learning how to regulate it. I think we can do two things at once, where you can have whatever kind of digital literacy classes or things for kids to learn how to use it, just like driving a car, and not have the phones in schools. Our view is generally that the distraction effects, these aren't things that any of us are very good at managing. And generally, they are designed to hook you, to distract you. And so our view is that, kids have not experienced any other way of growing up. And this is an opportunity to give them some space to learn, to build those skill sets, because their brains are not yet developed yet to handle the kind of pull of these devices. And So overall, my recommendation is that I think it is really important to have these conversations and teaching kids about these products, how they work, why they are so they hook you, but to give kids the space to have that environment to be free from the devices, at least for a bit of time. But it is a good and important question.
Thank you. Just a few more questions, and the amount of questions we can take depends on how long the questions are. Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is more of a comment than a question, but I know we did some things this last session to try to attract and retain teachers, and I would think this would be one of our top priorities if we wanted to retain and attract teachers going forward. And I hear those horror stories all the time when I served on a school board. We talk about we want test scores to go up, and I think this evidence that they have shown us test scores and social skills go down, mental health issues and suicide goes up. So everything that we want, it's going the other direction according to the statistics based on this information. Superintendent Begley, I agree with you. Why not do something? Why not do something, and why not do something now? 39% of the state budget goes to K-12 education. 39% of our state budget goes to K-12 education. If we could do one thing to help our education system, to me, this would be the one thing that we could do. It would help teachers, it would help students, it would help our whole society. So I would hope that we will take a serious look at taking the heat off of you all, making this a law, and then letting you handle it back at the grassroots level. But, we have a really good surplus right now in our rainy day fund. If we needed to throw in a little money for phone pouches or phone lockers, or if that's the problem, then I would be willing to do that. But this is one thing I think that we could do to make all the difference in the world in our kids and in their education. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Carroll.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah.
I think you brought up a good point about attracting and retaining teachers. And this is kind of a comment to the last question, or to the last comment as well. Think about the number of our teachers today in the state of Kentucky who didn't go through the traditional college route of education. A lot of our teachers are emergency certified. Their main focus is, I'm trying to stay a week ahead of my kids on the content that I'm being asked to teach them. So now you're going to tell me that I have to balance that with also trying to figure out how to help my students self-regulate cell phones. And I think you're just putting so much on them that it takes away from their ability to educate and do what their primary focus is.
Thank you.
I'll just say really quickly that I don't think it's an issue in Kentucky. I don't think there are unions there, but we have 11 of them in the school district, actually 12. And the teachers union were 100% supportive of this. It actually created some positive energy with the union and those of us who are in administration and leadership. So I just haven't found, that proverbial win-win. That's what this has been for us, really. We haven't found a downside yet.
Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my world, in early childhood education, it's the staff. Obviously, the problem with the cell phones, babies and toddlers aren't quite there yet. Have you all seen a need within the school systems as you implement these restrictions on students that you've had to get stricter on teachers and on staff in order to gain compliance?
Superintendent Begley, are you sure you all want to answer that question?
No, I'm just joking. I've got an answer for everything, right, or a reply for everything. Everybody knows. But Morgan can speak to that because we've had this conversation many, many times, and I bet Dr. Lawrence has as well.
I do think that something that was kind of said earlier, the reason we went to it as a school-wide is because we wanted to give teachers the authority to say, hey, this is what my boss is telling me to do. I'm taking the heat. I love it when Dr. Begley says, you know what, I'm going to attach my name to this so that I take the heat. So I think that can be alleviated at the state level if you guys take the heat, because now it's not, oh, my principal said this or my school district said this. This is a state law. This is a state regulation that we all need to follow. Now, one of the things that we also stress to our teachers and staff meetings is, hey, if we're going to expect our kids to put their cell phones away, we've got to model that. We've got to be attentive to when we're on our cell phones. Let's keep it to we're adults. We have appointments and things that are life issues that we have to worry about. But at the end of the day, if we're asking our kids to do something, let's model it for them. So let's not ourselves be on social media or scrolling and things. And we're battling it still. We've got a school-wide cell phone policy, just like anything else. You've got staff members who don't fully want to commit to it because they don't want the stigma that comes with it, and we'll do things that we have to do to make sure that they're enforcing it.
Representative Rawlings, you will have to be the last word. I'm going to have to stop here. Please proceed.
Thank you. I wanted to share an example. You mentioned cyberbullying. I talked to a father just the other day, and he was in ICU. His daughter was in the ICU. And what happened was she was in a chat group, and someone had threatened to kill her family member. He said that he was going to kill one of her family members, and she took it so seriously that she took pills to take her own life so she would be the one to die. So have you heard serious examples of that in your schools? Oh, and I also wanted to add, the father requested that we consider making cyberbullying a felony offense. But have you heard examples that serious?
Fortunately, we've not had to deal with anything that serious at Bourbon County High School, but I think you can probably point to schools across the state that have had the unfortunate reality of cell phones, cyberbullying, and social media creating days and events and weeks in their life that are truly difficult. And so I think if we can remove things that lead to those events, it just makes our job so much easier, because I don't personally want the burden of something like that. And that's ultimately where it falls.
That will need to be the last word here on this very important topic. I would definitely like to thank all the presenters. Everyone did an excellent job. I think it's pretty self-apparent that the reason we had this subject matter come up, several bills I'm sure will be filed, and we look forward to your all's input as those bills move through the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for your time.
Yep. Moving on, up next, we have CPE's Equal Education Opportunity Goals and Requirements. Mr. Powell, you're no stranger to this committee, and as the
or this topic,
correct, and as a presenter here, your time has just gone down to about 5 to 10 minutes on this subject. He's going to come down there and help with the PowerPoint. Just as a recap for everyone on the committee, I believe you gave this presentation 2 meetings ago, I believe.
July.
July, okay. And we asked you to come back to not give your presentation again, but to zero in on a specific subject matter area.
Yeah, correct. Just to dig in a little bit deeper on the actual evaluation process. So as he gets that up, I'm going to take the time here.
So before you start, just what I'd like to do to give you a map is if you could give us 4 minutes on your presentation on what the law is, what the regulation is, what you currently do, and then we're going to open it up for questions of 4 to 5 minutes.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what we're looking at.
Okay. So that's, is that not, that's weird. Sharing a different screen. Will it, okay. It's not changing on what they can see though, right? If I can get into that, I'm happy to just do it from there. Okay. We'll just do it like this. Okay.
Before you start, state your name for the record.
Yeah, Travis Powell, Senior Vice President, General Counsel at CPE.
Please proceed.
Okay, thanks. So just very quickly, again, the charge here was to just go rather quickly through sort of how the evaluation process works. But I will say that we have instituted a moratorium on this process about a month ago. So institutions will not be going through the same evaluation process again. They will. We are going to take the time instead to evaluate and come up with a new process that we will file in regulation. So last year, the process ending in June of this year actually is the last time that that campuses will have to go through this process. But so we're just real quickly. Here's a statutory and regulatory authority, Senate Bill 398 from 1992. This was implemented. You can see there the charge of the council, and the council operationalizes that through Administrative Regulation 13 KAR 2060. So it's the report and the evaluation process is split into two sections, both a quantitative and a qualitative section, equally split other than at the KCTCS institutions, which gets 2 more points on qualitative because they do not have graduate enrollment.
And for the members, if you cannot see that slide up there, there's a paper copy in your packet.
Okay. So...
Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay. So on the quantitative side, we do an evaluation of the following data elements. We look at undergraduate and graduate enrollment. There's an asterisk there because while we do set targets, or did set targets for underrepresented minority students for enrollment, we also asked for other types of diversity as well. So institutions had to provide a narrative to CPE to tell us about other types of diversity on their campus, whether that be religious, LGBTQ students, geographic diversity, international students, that sort of thing. So it was a holistic review for the enrollment piece. But on the other items, the student success data elements, we had first and second year retention for underrepresented minority students and low-income students, and graduation rates for underrepresented minority and low-income students, and degrees conferred / or credentials awarded if you're a KCS institution for URM and low-income students, and workforce diversity requirements. And so what we would do there is set a goal for each campus in each of those areas, a target, and we would measure their progress toward that target annually. And if they met the target, they would receive a 2. If they did not meet the target, they would get a 1 and then a 0 if they were on their way to meeting the target or above the baseline. And then if they were at or below the baseline for 2015-16, they would receive a 0 for that section. We also, it's hard to do. I'm right-handed. This is hard. Oops. We also had a qualitative section. So we asked institutions to, in the 3 areas of the plan, which at the time in 2015-16 were aligned with this council's strategic agenda, opportunity, success, and impact. And we had institutions identify strategies in each of those sections on how they were going to meet the goals as required by those sections, and actually provide a written report as to their implementation of the strategy. So ask them about how they implemented the strategy, analyzing the strategy effectiveness. So did the strategy achieve the goals that they were intended to achieve? And then lessons learned and next steps. So it really implemented a continuous improvement policy. And those strategies, the qualitative report were evaluated on by a rubric that we have incorporated by reference into the regulation, and on the same 2-1-0 scale with a maximum of 18 points. So you can see here, just give you an example. At our 4-year institutions, again, this was the last cycle. There were some questions on the last meeting we had about KSU and their ability to meet the goals in this process. And you can see there their actual scores, and you can see not getting full points in the qualitative section, and then also not meeting their targets towards retention and graduation for underrepresented minority and low-income students. That's just a little breakdown there of how that occurred. And then the next slide here is the KCTCS institutions, and you'll see Somerset Community College was the only other institution along with KSU that didn't receive automatic eligibility to offer new academic programs. But there is a waiver process that institutions can go through. It's basically an improvement plan that they put together on how they're going to try to make more goals, progress towards the goals listed in their plans. And we've actually already approved waivers for Kentucky State University and Somerset Community College. Chair, I have some slides on some of the things that we're thinking about for the new process. Would you like for me to talk about that for a little bit, or is this all? Is this?
Let's save those for another day, if you don't mind. I'm sure you'll be back.
Sure. Well, can I just say one? I'll just say one thing
Absolutely.
about it. Is this that we are looking at changing, and please look through the materials that you have. I updated these slides. They can send that you can send those around to folks if you don't mind. They're pretty much the same as what you have in your materials, but I think what you'll see in there is, we've heard a lot of the things that have been discussed in some of these committee meetings. I've had individual conversations with some of you all. I think there are some things that we can include in our new policy moving forward that will align with the new performance funding model metrics, and also incorporated some things like diversity of thought, civil engagement, discussion about the First Amendment, better campus climate, that sort of thing. So love to hear any of your all's feedback individually. Please contact me if you have some of those. Love to get your feedback.
Thank you so much. We just have two questions. We have Representative Decker.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. You communicated with me about this, and I think you described it as a moratorium on the current rules. So do you intend to repeal this regulation that has the current?
We wouldn't repeal it. We would just update it. And we would change the regulation. So we need a regulation in place to implement the statute. So we would put a new evaluation system in place in that regulation. So we would amend the regulation, remove the parts that we didn't want to keep, and add new sections.
Okay, but as you have a moratorium on it, what can you tell me as general counsel, what provision of the Kentucky Administrative Procedures Act allows you to do that, to not enforce what's there?
Well,
without repealing. Excuse me.
Well, it's our process in place to do the evaluation. There's nothing necessarily in the regulation that talks about how often we do it. And so the moratorium will be in place until we can evaluate and implement a new policy. We had when we were implementing the original policy, or the 2016 policy, after it went into place, we actually didn't do an evaluation for about a year because we wanted institutions to get their plans in place and actually have them to start, implementing the things that we're doing in their plans, so we could evaluate the progress toward what was in their plans. Because if we started evaluating immediately, then we wouldn't be able to tell that the progress wouldn't necessarily be made based on what was in their plans. So we've done this before. We've done moratoriums before. So the process is in place for us to use it, but it doesn't have to be an annual process.
Just very brief.
Quickly.
So you think there is a provision of the Administrative Procedures Act that allows this not to be followed now till you decide that it is?
I don't know that it's in the Administrative Procedures Act, but the regulation sets up our framework for evaluation, and it's up to CPE to decide how often it needs to use it. So,
so to piggyback on that, I think what you're trying to say, there's no KRS requiring this, correct?
There's a KRS requiring the structure, but as far as the annual review process, CPE decides how often it does the review process.
Through regulation.
Yeah, how often it uses the regulation, basically.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so, as you stated earlier, any future decision to change that time frame, you're gonna put that in a reg.
Yeah, we will.
You intend to change the reg to match what you're doing.
Yeah, we'll change I don't know what exactly we're going to do yet, and we're still in the process of developing that. But whatever we change it to, we'll amend the regulation and make those changes in the regulation, and then once that regulation is final, then we'll have to figure out the time frame for enforcement. But yes.
Senator Tishner will be the final question in this segment.
I'll be really brief. I was looking forward to hearing about the new implementation and the new plan, so perhaps we could just get together and you could go over that with me. But I anticipate you'll be back to go over that with us.
Sure, I'd love to come back. I mean, it would be helpful for me, frankly, to get feedback. I mean, we're just in the infancy of sort of developing the new policy. there's a review process that goes as part of the Administrative Procedures Act, but I would love to get information from you all on the front end on your thoughts when we sort of solidify this a little bit more. I'm happy to have individual conversations with you as well on kind of what we're thinking about and others too, because that would be really helpful. Like to try to get things squared away before we file, and talk to all the constituent groups before we file the regulations. So that would be great.
That was part of the reason we called you here today, was to start the conversation there. So we really, really appreciate you appearing here today on this important topic. Wish we had more time. Sorry about that. It's my fault. But next up, we have Dr. Ryan Quarles and his group to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion in post-secondary institutions, more specifically KCTC. You all know the deal. Make sure your green light's on. State your name for the record. And while he's preparing the slides, we've got about 25 minutes in this segment, and we appear to be asking a lot of questions today. So if you could keep it maybe 10, 15 minutes, kind of in that time frame, we'd really appreciate it.
You got it.
Please proceed. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Ryan Quarles, president of KCTCS. Thanks for having us today. I'm joined by two colleagues here. We have Dr. Renee Wagner, our acting vice president of academic and student affairs, as well as Dr. Phil Neal, our acting executive vice president and provost for KCTCS. And we look forward to sharing the great work we're doing at our community colleges across Kentucky. Next slide. As you all know, since the establishment of our junior colleges in the early 1900s, the foundational mission of our community colleges and then later technical schools have really been focused on providing higher education for all, for the masses, and also job training for people. And today, KCTCS mission has not changed. We're no different. We're proud to serve all Kentuckians, and I like to say that we are a college for anybody and everybody that wants to improve themselves. We focus on three themes: access for all Kentuckians, affordability, and workforce solutions for our employers as well. And as you can tell with the slides, we are the largest higher education entity in Kentucky. 100,000+ students. Enrollment's actually up well over 8% from this time last year. We like to celebrate that. Our system is made up of 16 colleges, and chances are there is a campus near you. We have 70 campuses right now, and we're proud that we're within 30 minutes drive of 95% of all Kentuckians, really focused on access across our state. We're also the largest provider of dual credit, which means we're in our high schools. In fact, we educate 68% of all high school students who are taking dual credit classes. That's about a third of all of our enrollees. We're also proud that we are the state's largest provider of GEDs. And just recently, as recent as this week, we're proud to announce that we awarded over 4,460 GEDs to inmates, incarcerated people across our state, offering them hope as they exit the criminal justice system. We also have valedictorians. We have students. We have a student right now that's at MIT. And we're also helping students that may not be ready for college with remedial education as well. Bottom line, I'm proud that we're in our prisons and jails. I'm proud that we're educating high schoolers. I'm proud that we're educating adult learners, those 25 and older. It's about a third of our enrollees as well. We're also proud that we're stepping up to be in our recovery centers and those facing the scourge of addiction as well. We are open to everybody. We welcome all Kentuckians who have the simple hope of improving their lives. And of course, we have a really robust workforce development mission as well. And so if we're not educating Kentuckians on the credit side, those earning degrees or certificates, we're going into our employers. We have relationships with over 7,000 companies right now and actually educating students at the job site as well. And as you can tell from this slide, a snapshot of our student profile of who we enroll. We have a variety of backgrounds, and we have a variety of support services for them as well to help them get across the finish line. Just take a moment of how we compare to the four-year traditional college students. If you see here, 54% of our students are first-generation college goers. We take a lot of pride in that. It takes a lot of courage to be the first person in your family to attempt a degree. More than 40% of our students come to us unprepared, and so we have to work with them to get them ready for college-level classes. 35% of our students are parents, and the most interesting statistic that I like to share is that 60% of all of our students are working, either full-time or part-time. These are folks that have grit. These are folks that are doing this because they want to better their lives and financial situation. Many of our students cite financial concerns as a major issue with retention and graduating from our programs. You just heard earlier the need for wraparound services for our students, and the mental health issue is real. 40% of our students report anxiety and depression at a mild or severe level. We also have students that are just one speed bump away from achieving their dream. That might be a flat tire. It might be a babysitter that canceled on them. It might be the fact they may not have food for their family as well. And so we're proud that we're raising funds for our food pantries, which are depleted every day on our campuses, but also emergency funds to help that student that may have a car that breaks down, etc. We also are trying to help more robustly with child care, housing for students. We have a lot of relationships in partnerships with Family Scholar House across Kentucky, tutoring, mentoring, and of course food banks. Our students face challenges that you simply may not see at such a high level at our four-year traditional institutions, and because of that, we are committed at our community and technical colleges for success for all students. And I'd like to take just a moment and pause the presentation and say thank you for your all's generous support of the Work Ready Scholarship. It's working. We exhaust those funds every single year. This is helping students get essentially a free ride to community colleges if they're studying of areas of high job demand across our state as well. And just one final comment on our student profile. High schoolers, adult learners, those achieving their GED, our inmates, those in recovery, and our Donovan scholars as well. When we say all, we mean all. We are the folks that fix your cars. We're the folks that fix air conditioners and heaters. We run the hospitals that people may not see, the positions that we train. We build things in Kentucky, and we even fix the lights when the electricity goes out. Next slide. So student impact. As you can see on this slide, we're an open access institution, meaning we have no admissions requirements except for some of our more competitive allied nursing programs. We accept students for who they are, and we meet them with the skills and needs that they may need to improve upon, whether it be for those that want to get their 2-year associate's degree completed so they can move on and transfer for a 4-year degree, or those that want to change their lives in as little as 4 weeks with a new CDL license to learn how to drive big trucks. You can change your life in just a few weeks with KCTCS. We do provide remedial education when needed and wraparound support services to all students, which helps us with our retention. KCTCS does not require DEI-related training for our students, and all of our campus events across our 70 campuses are open to all students. On the employee impact side, similarly, we do not have any DEI requirements in the employee application or hiring process, and we do not require any DEI training for our employees unless it is related as federally mandated for Title IX funds. And in conclusion today, since the formation of KCTCS, that bold move in 1997, we've been asked to be nimble. We've been asked to adapt to the economic needs and the workforce needs of Kentucky. We're going to continue to be focused on that. Our mission is to serve all Kentuckians. Combined with the programs we offer has allowed us to be responsive to the state's needs, but we can always do better. We are constantly evaluating staff and faculty positions across our system to make sure that we are serving the needs of all Kentuckians, and again, we'll continue that evaluation. We're proud of the way that we're able to serve our students because we cheer on every single Kentuckian. And as you know, community colleges have been about helping everybody, and we intend to do just that. As I once took community college classes myself at Lexington Community College, now BCTC. And while I have your attention, just to let you know, we'll be reporting back to you next month with a conclusion of Senate Joint Resolution 179, where you all asked us to evaluate ourselves and come back with a reform and reset plan. We look forward to that conclusion and the presentation to you as we examine our KCTCS system and better prepare ourselves for the next 25 years. So I want to conclude with this. Why do we do this? Back in May, I had the opportunity as a newly sworn-in president to attend my first graduation ceremony. Chose to go to Big Sandy Community College in Eastern Kentucky in Prestonsburg. Got to stand on stage and watch our graduates walk across. Many of them on their regalia had many different significant robes and signals and that signified they were first-generation Kentucky graduates. Their kids were in the crowd. Their family were in the crowd. Many of them may have tried college before. Many of them thought they weren't college material. There's an untold number of Kentuckians who would not have gone on to achieve a certificate, an associate's degree, a four-year degree, or go on to law school or med school, that if not for the community and technical college system, they may have never tried. And we're there to give our Kentuckians, regardless of their background, an opportunity to change their lives, and that's why we do this. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. I'll remind members of the committee we have done a lot of informational meetings this interim on DEI, and as we go into session, there may be some bills on that subject, and this kind of puts the capstone on that. KCTC with this presentation kind of ends that process. And you know, I know you've taken a class at a community college. How many colleges have you taken a class at?
A few.
I'm
starting my welding certificate too, so.
First up, we have Representative Timoney.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Quarles, thank you for your presentation today. I, too, am a former LCC student. So there are quite a few of us in the room that have been able to go on and do some things. So in my opinion, I can't stress the importance of KCTCS enough to the importance of where we're going as a Commonwealth. Dr. Thompson talks about the 600,000 people in Kentucky that are a certificate, a couple classes away from being more prosperous and leading to a better life for their families. You all are a key part of the dream for this General Assembly in the pursuit of a lower income tax. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We need more of our employees, or more of our constituents, more of the citizens of the Commonwealth to be earning more money in order to get to there. We can't just nickel and dime it and play accountant games to get to that number. It's going to be on you all. So they're really, really important, and I know you all are ready for this. Softball question, Dr. Quarles. How are things been going since you've taken over at KCTCS?
Well, first off, if you took classes at LCC, that means you're an alumni, which means you need to donate to our foundation. So,
duly noted.
How are things going? Well, I started January 1st, session started January 2nd, and this year has been primarily been focused on being in compliance with audits. We had an audit last year initiated by our Board of Regents, mainly about fiscal issues at the system office. And we're proud that as of last Thursday, we have cured all findings from the 2023 audit as well. We just had a forensic audit completed, which you all helped fund. That was submitted to us last Thursday. We're going through the recommendations, and we're happy to cure those findings as well. And then we have a third audit. As you all know, the Kentucky Fire Commission is attached to us, and they're going through a self-evaluation process as well. So item number one is compliance, particularly on the fiscal side of the house as well. Number two, building a team, an executive team, so that we can prepare for our legislation, both with statutory changes, regulatory changes, internal policy, and other things that need changed. But what keeps us going is the quality of our programs is awesome. In fact, Dr. Wagner's working hard with her counterparts about evaluating academic programs that are no longer relevant. And in fact, this year alone, we've had over 200 certificates or programs which we have eliminated because they're no longer needed or have relevancy. We're going to continue to do that self-evaluation. And so in a nutshell, to answer your question, compliance first. Now we're working on the vision for the next 25 years, which includes building up our foundations that you can donate to.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
Thank you, President Quarles. I want to celebrate the dual credit aspect.
Yeah.
Again, my wife is a counselor at a technical center in Lexington, and the number of dual credit courses that she gets to help create the course codes and whatnot, and how empowering it is for those kids to have a college course code on their transcript, on their schedule. Like, that's real. That's a real thing. They carry it around like a badge of honor. And anything that we can do to break that divide, that glass wall that prevents them from coming onto our KCTCS campus or higher ed, we need to support it. So thank you all for your continued support there. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to see you again, President Quarles. I can't say I ever attended LCC classes, but I can say I was on the last board of LCC that voted to change the name to Bluegrass Community Technical College, hired Dr. Augusta Julian, and then I walked out the door. 2 months ago, we had several state university presidents here, including the president of University of Kentucky, Dr. Capilouto. And all of them indicated that since the U.S. Supreme Court decision 2023 that eliminated affirmative action, that they had seen some decline in their African American student enrollment. Now, I know you're an open enrollment institution, but I do want to ask you that since that decision, have you seen any drop off? And this, you can ask this question too, Dr. Wagner. I don't want to ignore you. Have you seen any drop off, decline over the last year in the enrollment of African American students in KCTCS?
The enrollment tends to stay fairly steady, but we have noticed a decline in some of our African American male students on some of the campuses, especially like our Jefferson campus in Louisville. And so we make efforts towards trying to build enrollment with those particular students. But it's tended to remain fairly steady.
Anything you want to add to that, Dr. Quarles?
Just that if you look at our most recent enrollment data, we know that maybe a decline, but our number of URMs as a percentage is higher than what you see at the four-year universities.
That is all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. I think you mentioned something that could really be a benefit to a lot of the folks that I serve. Is this 4-week CDL course, is that offered at all of your locations, specifically Southwest Louisville?
I think most of them, we can get back to you on that, but we want to be the provider of CDLs. And this is one part of our reform package is for county governments, city governments, other intergovernment agencies as well. But we can get back to you about the specific locations.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Senator Tishner.
Thank you. So the audit that, the forensic audit, is there a breakdown of expenditures in the DEI departments at KCTCS in that audit? And if, can we get that? Have we gotten it? Can it be sent to us?
Submitted last week. Of course, we can get that to you, but I think it was submitted to you last week with our response to the LRC request. Yeah.
Yeah, as Senator Tishner, as with the other universities, there were numerous questions that they were required to answer before they appeared and submit that information to us. So we should have that, and it is posted in the meeting materials. Senator Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that presentation. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work you all do, particularly with the populations that get access to higher education through the work that you do. I just wanted to ask this question. I may have missed it in your presentation. The 2-year piece is basically where you all focus. I'm wondering, do you keep statistics on those who go to a 4-year finish, go to another institution, and this is their first step? Because I noticed you made some comment about, well, no, go ahead. I'll just leave it there.
I know that about 16,000 of our students transfer to a 4-year each academic year, which we're proud of, and we need more. We need more transferring, but do we track them?
The state of Kentucky tracks
graduation and completion rates of our transfer students that go on to our public universities, we actually have a higher than average completion rate than the national average. I believe, don't quote me on this number, but it's close. About 3/4 of our students who complete with us and then transfer will finish the bachelor's degree on average in 2 years. And that completion rate is higher than the national average.
Mr. Chairman, just so I'm clear on this, give me those statistics one more time.
So again,
the people who enter KCTC, what percentage of those who enter go on to complete a bachelor's degree? The ones that enter your program.
That we'll have to get back on the specific data on that. We can get that data for you. The numbers I was quoting is of those who are in a transfer-bound pathway and complete our 2-year degree and then go on to the public universities in Kentucky and complete the bachelor's degree. Those were the numbers I was quoting you, the success rates.
I would appreciate that other information if you can. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Quarles, and this is kind of a random question, but you mentioned a little bit about planning for the future with WKCTC. There's a lot of discussion within the Commonwealth and really across this entire world about nuclear energy. And in this Commonwealth, the community and technical college system is going to be a key component in building the ecosystem for us to follow and to allow us to thrive in this area. What discussions have you all started having, and what plans are you making to identify programs that we're going to need, skills that we're going to need to teach to get us moving in that direction?
Well, as with any industry, we welcome direct input with our 16 colleges, and if it's affecting more than one college, the input can be taken at the system office. One of the parts of Senate Joint Resolution 179 is creating a more formal intake process so that when an industry or trade association or a specific employer, regardless of size, says we need to upskill 8 employees or 8,000, that there's a way for them to officially inform us of that. And we've been working with the Kentucky Chamber, we've been working with the Cabinet for Economic Development, and other partners across Kentucky to do a better job of that. Dr. Neal actually was a president at Sky CTC, and perhaps you can give your experience of how an industry may approach you and then be nimble enough to change or create a new program.
There's a variety of different levels that we interact with industries at each one of our colleges, starting with what I call program advisory committees. So each program, welding, nursing, culinary arts, so forth and so on, has advisory committees made up of representatives from that specific or respective industry that meet with the faculty twice a year, typically, once in the fall, once in the spring. They review the curriculum that's being taught in that program from a practitioner, from an employer standpoint. They look at the equipment that we use, the competencies that we teach to. They help us stay relevant and ahead of the curve when it comes to that. And they also tell us the upcoming trends, the need for developing new certificates or specialty areas. So that's one where we're already engaged with the industry. We also do a tremendous amount of what we call workforce solutions or customized training with industries, where a company might call us in to help do professional development or skills upgrade for their employees. We stay constantly involved with doing that with thousands of companies each year. We also use a tremendous amount of statewide data when we look at KY Stats data. We have what we call our program alignment tool. It helps our program areas stay ahead of the curve on the needs that are coming in the job market, as well as understanding, are we meeting the supply demand in our current market?
Thank you so much. That will be the last question in this segment, and definitely won't be the last time we see this group in front of the committee. They'll be back next. Some of you will be back next month to discuss Senate Resolution 179. And just as a heads up, I was talking to Co-Chair Tipton. At some point, we'll have you back for a discussion of the audit, the results of your audit. That will either be in this committee or one of the BR committees.
Happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up on the agenda, we have at the end of the agenda proposed administrative regs. I'd like to make an announcement once again for everybody. It's the role and wishes of both of the chairs to put these regs on every committee meeting so you have a chance to review them. You can choose to make a motion on these regs if there's something you don't like, but those are on here for your review. I don't see any problems. I don't see any motions at this time. And if there are no further questions, just as an announcement, there will be, this is unusual, there will be a December meeting of this joint committee, and that shall take place on December 10th, 2024 at 11 a.m. If there are no further questions or comments, do I have a motion for adjournment?